Good evening, everyone. I'm Jack Stanford from the Biological Station. It's my very distinct pleasure to introduce tonight's lecture. First, I want to thank President Dennison and the sponsors of this lecture series. It's really an important event at the University of Montana, and it's a distinct pleasure tonight for me to be able to introduce what those of us in river ecology feel is the gold standard of a lecture in river ecology, Judith Meyer. Judy is a distinguished professor of long note and long career at the University of Georgia. She's won many awards, including the Award of Excellence of the North American Mythological Society, which we always paraphrase as the premier group of river ecologists in the world. She's a widely published and distinguished research scientist in the cycling of nitrogen and phosphorus and other nutrients in stream ecosystems. She does have a proclivity for rather small streams, but the work that she's done and the many students and postdocs that she's mentored are all over the field of river ecology, stream ecology, in the United States and far beyond. She's been a mentor to many students and, as I said, postdocs, but most importantly, maybe it's important to say that Judy has served as a mentor to a cohort of young women that's followed her and are now stellar scientists in our field. Judy's very active in applying her science across the board, making her science count, and as you can see her title up there tonight, she will enlighten us about the ecology of small streams as derived from her experience in headwater streams in the Southeast. Please help me welcome distinguished Professor Judith Meyer.
Well, it's a real honor to be here, and thanks to President Dennison and the university for inviting me, and thanks to Jack for those kind words. There are many, I have fond memories of the biological station. We had a very important seminal meeting in stream ecology at the biological station, and my son was about 2 years old at the time, and Jack allowed me to bring him along, and he and my mother spent the whole day throwing stones into Flathead Lake, and it's still one of my happy memories of that place. And also there are ties between Montana and Athens, Georgia that I remembered today as I was out walking on the Oval and saw the Jeanette Rankin building. One of the main nonprofits in Athens, Georgia is the Jeanette Rankin Foundation, and which funds older women who are wanting to go back to college and get a degree. And I've served on the review board for that for a number of years, and it's yet another link between Montana and Georgia that are distant but share some interesting history. So what I hope is going to happen is, oh dear, I want to talk about the birthplaces of rivers. Oh, okay. And when you hear the word river, this is probably what you think about. This is what my colleagues Jack Stanford and Rick Hauer and many of you on campus study rivers of this size. And what I want you to recognize and realize is that rivers like this are what they are because of the small streams that begin them. And this is maybe what headwater streams, tiny streams, look like around here, where they're born in glaciers. Where I come from, on the East Coast, this is a headwater stream. This actually is a headwater stream in New Hampshire. And I want to begin with a quote from T.S. Eliot. "The river itself has no beginning or end. In its beginning, it is not yet the river. In its end, it is no longer the river. What we call the headwaters is only a selection from among the innumerable sources which flow together to compose it. At what point in its course does the Mississippi become what the Mississippi means?" And this poet recognized one of the points that I want to make tonight, which is what we call the headwaters is only a selection from among the innumerable sources which flow together. So a stream does not have a single headwater. It's formed from a number of tiny streams that flow together to make it what it is. And this stream is in many, I said it was a stream in New Hampshire, and this is in many respects my birthplace as a stream ecologist as well. This is where I did my dissertation work. And I studied streams like that for a long time. This is a small stream flowing through a forested patch in Athens, Georgia. That's what it looked like in February of 2002. By November of that year, this is what that stream looked like. And by April of the next year, this is what that stream looked like. And if you were to go there today, it would be a paved over parking lot with a shopping center. And so my midlife crisis was an epiphany, realizing, oh my goodness, the streams that I've been studying in places like New Hampshire, the mountains of North Carolina, are not the streams that surround us today. And that made me wish to try to do something about problems like this. So what I want to talk to you about today is about the birthplaces of rivers, about headwater streams. And I want to begin talking about why we should care about them, about their diversity, about what their contribution is to the whole river network. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about what we're doing with them, and then try to end on a more positive note and thinking about how we can begin to undo some of the damage that we have done. So I began my career as a biologist, and so I'm concerned about the kinds of organisms that can be found in headwaters and the kinds of organisms that are dependent upon these sorts of systems. And some of them are found only in small streams. Some of them are widespread, meaning they're found throughout the river network in small streams and large streams. Some of them are seasonally, only seasonally found in headwater streams. They migrate there. In some cases, headwater streams are essential for particular life history stages. And then there are those organisms that, although they do not live in the stream, they're dependent upon either what the stream produces or on the environment that it creates. So what are some of these biota that are found in headwater streams? Well, some of them are the primary producers. In many headwater streams, it's primarily mosses and liverworts that form the green layer. If there's enough light, algae and particularly diatoms are the most abundant in most headwater systems. And then in some springs, there are many vascular plants. And here are just some examples of some of the beautiful diatoms that can be found in headwater systems. And I have just shown the numbers of species that one might expect to find in a headwater system. And the microbiologists in the audience, I know there's at least one, will recognize how important the decomposers are in systems like this. We don't know how many species of bacteria there are in a headwater stream, but if it's anything like what's in the soils, there are probably thousands. We do know more about the kinds of fungi that are found there, and there can be 30 to 50 species of fungi in a tiny little headwater stream. And these are some pictures of what the fungal spores and the fungal hyphae look like as they're on a leaf and wood material, decomposing it in the stream. And then what more individuals have studied, or what maybe more people know about, are the aquatic insects that are very abundant in headwater streams and really form the bulk of the food web in headwaters. And there are, many of the stonefly species are found only in headwater systems. Even the tiniest little stream can have a very diverse fauna. And even streams that do not flow all year round, streams that are intermittent and flow only seasonally, nonetheless have a very diverse fauna. And in this study that was done in Oregon, showed, in fact, a higher diversity of organisms in this summer dry or intermittent stream than in a permanently flowing stream. And these are larval caddisflies, and some people may not recognize how exciting and lovely caddisflies are. And for those of you in the audience who maybe don't have an intimate familiarity with caddisflies, these are jewelry that has been made from the cases of caddisflies. I'm actually wearing the necklace I'm wearing has a caddisfly case. So these aquatic insects have many talents, and some of you may not have spent a lot of time watching insects in a stream, and so here you see a mayfly on a rock in the stream, and if you look closely you can see the mouth parts there as that mayfly is grazing on algae. Now, I'm a worthless photographer, and I think that what the North American Benthological Society has done by making video clips like this available to bad photographers like me is just fabulous, and so I want to thank them. Because I think that it's a way of showing the world, the fabulous world that we find in streams. And although the aquatic insects are probably the best studied components of the fauna in streams, there are many other species of invertebrates. There are mollusks, there are crustaceans like the crayfish that are common, many smaller ones as well, like the copepods and cladocerans, and then many other sort of smaller groups of invertebrates, and they're very tiny animals, but they can be extremely diverse. And I have to say that this is probably the least understood component of the fauna in headwater streams and really in all streams. And then, of course, there are the fishes. And some of the headwater species, or species that are characteristic of headwaters, are the minnows and darters, sculpins. In the southeastern U.S., we have at least 16 species that are found almost exclusively in headwaters. 3/4 of them are threatened and endangered. And then many of the species that are unique to springs are also very threatened. And then again, we have many of the fishes use intermittent systems. There's a darter, for example, that lives much of its life in much larger water bodies, but then migrates up into these tiny little rivulets that flow through fields, and that's where they lay their eggs, and that's an important breeding site for them. So even though the species is not there year-round, the headwaters are still critical for its survival. Oh, and so here is This is a slimy sculpin, Caudus bairdi, one of the very common fishes in here's a heads-on view, in the streams that I study in the Appalachians, again, courtesy of NABS and Freshwater Illustrated. So the fishes that are found in headwaters, as I said, some of them are specialists, some of them are species that use headwaters only seasonally, and swim to the headwaters to avoid warm temperatures, swim to the headwaters to avoid high water in the main stem, and then those species that use headwaters for spawning or nursery areas. There's an interesting piece of work that's going to be coming out soon that was done in Oregon showing that coho salmon use the headwaters, and the coho that spawn and rear in those headwaters when they begin to migrate downstream are much larger than the ones that are growing up in the main stem, and those larger young have a greater chance of survival, and so the fact that they're rearing in these intermittent channels is in the headwaters is very significant. And salamanders and other amphibians are a big part of the headwater stream fauna. Again, very diverse, many species of salamanders, frogs, and toads that are associated with headwater streams. And for those headwater streams that are fishless, these are particularly good spots for salamanders, and the fish predators are not present. And then we don't often think about this, but there are many other birds that are dependent on headwaters as well, that are dependent upon the aquatic insects that are produced in those systems that then the birds use as their food resource. There are also some species like the dippers that feed within the stream itself, moles and shrews that feed on aquatic insects, and then those birds and bats that feed on the insects that are emerging from those systems. And the last video clip is of a dipper in a headwater stream, and you can see it's foraging for aquatic insects in the bottom of the stream. So the point of all that was to give you a sense of the diversity of life that can be found in headwater streams, and these tiny little channels that you can step over very easily. And here is a stream that my colleagues Bruce Wallace and Jack Webster and I have been studying for a couple of decades along with our students. You can't even really see the stream. It's right down in here, and it's right in there. And this tiny little system, and this is not a complete catalog of the taxa, over 286 taxa just in this little rivulet of water. A stream a little larger than this that was studied in Germany has over 1,000 species, and the reason that there are more species in that one is that they did a much better job of identifying all these other invertebrates. This is where I think this number is way too low. I think we probably have most of the insects. We know a lot about the fungi, so I'm pretty confident about those numbers, but I'm sure we've vastly underestimated this. And just another example, these are 8 tiny little streams in North Carolina, again in this area that we've been studying for a number of years, and we find 51 families of aquatic insects, 145 genera that are found in these minuscule streams. And small streams are also significant not only for the biota for which they provide a home, but also for what those organisms do. And one of the services that those small streams provide to us is nutrient removal. And this is the work from Ashley Helton, who was up in Montana this summer, actually. And what she has done is, for a stream network in Kansas and in North Carolina, looked at what proportion of the nitrate removal that happens in that whole network. And this is a network that's a watershed of about 1,000 square kilometers and 400 square kilometers. So a good-sized stream network, and yet most of the removal of nitrate that's happening in this network is happening in the very smallest streams, less than 10 or 20 kilometers in size of the square kilometers of the watershed. So the very smallest streams in the network are the ones that are most efficient at removal of nutrients from the water body. So I put together this figure to try to summarize why I think that small streams are ecologically significant. And on the left side of the network are all the ways in which streams influence sort of their export, what they export downstream or to the riparian zone. So they provide insects that drift downstream that then provide food for the fishes, insects that emerge and feed the riparian fauna like the birds that I was talking about. The riparian vegetation is decomposed in those streams, exported downstream, and provides food resources for downstream systems. They're effective, the data I just showed you, on removing nutrients and changing the form of nutrients so that they have different impacts downstream. So in all of these ways, the tiny little headwater streams influence what's happening in this larger river system. And then for the organisms that spend much of their lives in the big rivers, they migrate up to headwater streams because they can provide a refuge from invasive species. They have a unique chemistry. They can provide a refuge from competitors. They can provide a thermal refuge from predators. They offer nursery habitats, rich feeding areas, and spawning sites. So in a diversity of ways, headwater streams influence what's happening in ecosystems downstream. So I hope I've conveyed some of why I think headwater streams are both interesting to study, convinced you that they have a diverse fauna, and that they can make a difference to the larger systems downstream. Now I want to talk a little bit about what we're doing to them. And much, at least in my part of the world and in other parts of the world as well, much of our impacts on headwater streams is because of urbanization that's occurring. So this shows the increase, the blue, solid blue is the increase in human population over this 15-year period, and then the slashed bars show the increase in area of urbanized land. And so in the South, for example, 20% population increase, but a 60% increase in urbanized land. Similar patterns in other parts of the country as well. And this is sprawl. This is basically a picture of sprawl, that we're taking up more land per person. In Atlanta, Georgia is really the poster child, I think, of sprawl, and this gives you an idea of what that's like in this area. So in this 15-year period, human population doubled while land area in residential and urban use tripled. And this is just a recent study that's been done by some folks at the Institute, looking from 1992 to 2001, 54 forested acres were lost per day in this greater Atlanta metropolitan area and the surrounding counties, while 28 acres of impervious surfaces were added. So, by impervious surfaces, I mean roads, streets, parking lots, rooftops, and this really matters to a stream because it greatly alters the way water flows from the landscape to the stream. When you have impervious surfaces, that water runs off very quickly, and it doesn't penetrate into the groundwater, and floods are more common, and so it's a major change in the hydrology of the system. So a shift from 54 acres of forested land to 28 acres of impervious surface is a huge change in the hydrology of the stream. Not only have we changed the water movement, we've actually changed the miles of stream present. In the Chattahoochee River flows through the city of Atlanta, and stream ecologists think about drainage density, which is the length of stream per area of watershed. And so in forested and largely pasture landscapes, that length is 1,350 meters per square kilometer, but in suburban and urban watersheds, it's only 922. So that says we've lost something like a third of the stream miles through the process of urbanization. And you say, well, how are they lost? Well, they're lost by putting them in pipes, by converting them to drainage ditches, by just filling them in, by paving them over. That picture I showed you at the very beginning, that's what's happening on the landscape. This is not unique to Atlanta, and it's not unique even to our time. This is a picture from Rock Creek in Maryland, and this is what the stream looked like in 1913, and with urbanization in the Washington, D.C. area, over that, 53-year period, all the little headwaters have been lost. And as a consequence, flooding is much more severe in this basin. And it's not a uniquely U.S. problem. This is a map from Vancouver, British Columbia, and you see all the red lines on the map? Those are all streams that used to be. These are the lost streams of Vancouver, British Columbia. All tiny little headwaters. They probably had salmon populations at one time, but they have now been subsumed by urban Vancouver. And this is something I found on the web. This is a lost river walks of central Toronto, Canada. And here all the blue lines on the map are streams that used to be. And this is a conservation group. It's done something very interesting, which is basically show where one can walk in the city and realize that under you through a pipe flows what used to be a stream. So my message on small streams is that they are uncatalogued, which I will say more about shortly, unnamed, unappreciated, and therefore unprotected. I want to say just a few words about the fact that they're not named. We name our streets, but there are many unnamed river channels, and there are some conservation groups that have found it very effective to bring together a neighborhood group, and if the stream is flowing through the neighborhood, and give a name to that. There's a procedure that one has to go through to do that, but it gives the stream recognition, and it gives the neighborhood recognition that they may have something of value. And I think that I would like to see that happen even more. So what about this business about being uncatalogued? The Chattooga River is famous from the movie Deliverance from long ago. It's in North Carolina, and 1 to 24,000 scale map, which is what you use as a USGS topo map that you would use for hiking or whatever, it identifies only 21% of the stream channel length in this watershed. So most of the stream channels are not even on maps that are used oftentimes in regulatory decisions and other decisions about streams. And Luna Leopold, who is a famous fluvial geomorphologist, wrote this in one of his books. The blue lines on a map, like a topo map, are drawn by non-professional, low-salaried personnel. In actual fact, they are drawn to fill a rather personalized aesthetic. And you can see that sometimes if you put together two topo maps from adjacent regions, and you can see that even though they're right next to each other, there's not any big change in geology. Oftentimes, the drainage density is very different in one versus another, and it's because of this. I spent most of my career studying streams in this basin in North Carolina, let's start at this map scale. Many maps are done at 1 to 500,000 scale. It shows 0.8 kilometers. And the topo maps in this system show 24 kilometers. We have a finer scale map that the Forest Service produced, and that shows 56 kilometers of stream. So, and the national hydrography data set that is on the web is 1 to 100,000 scale. So the streams that I've spent my career studying really don't exist on maps. It's like I've been living in a virtual reality or something, or it's a reality that's not recognized by many of the maps. And we have the capacity these days with geographic information systems to do better. I don't know how well this shows to you, but there are three types of streams. This is the blue lines are the ones that are from a 1 to 100,000 scale map. The green lines are 1 to 24,000, and then the red lines are the streams that one gets by recognizing that stream size in this area starts at a particular watershed size and then do the flow lines accordingly. And this group did this because they were particularly concerned about a particular species of darter that occurs in streams that don't exist on the map. And so by drawing the map more accurately, they actually show the habitat that the fish knows is there. It's just that that we humans don't recognize that in our maps. And Gwinnett County is in metropolitan Atlanta, has been growing extremely rapidly, as you can see here. And what Gwinnett County has done is gone out and mapped all the streams in the county. And they have 2,800 miles of streams and drainage ditches, and around 4,000 miles of stormwater pipes. So, which means what we have done is we have taken the natural stream channels that existed and converted them basically to stormwater pipes. Turn now to a poet once again. This is a poem written many years ago by Robert Frost. The poets have figured this out before I did as a scientist. A brook in the city, the farmhouse lingers, though averse to square with the new city street it has to wear a number in. But what about the brook that held the house as in an elbow crook? The brook was thrown deep in a sewer dungeon under stone, in fetid darkness, still to live and run, and all for nothing it had ever done except forget to go in fear, perhaps. No one would know except for ancient maps that such a brook ran water. But I wonder if, from its being kept forever under, the thoughts may not have risen that so keep this new-built city from both work and sleep. A couple of things I find really interesting about this is, first of all, this description of exactly what's been happening to streams in urban areas, and then no one would know except for ancient maps. You know, those maps I showed you of Vancouver and Toronto, and so those are all streams that were discovered by studying ancient maps. So Frost was very well, he knew what was going on, if maybe the rest of us didn't. So what happens when streams get buried like this in drainage pipes? Well, it's an obvious loss of habitat for aquatic insects and other taxa. It's an impediment for fishes moving upstream depending upon how the culverts are constructed. And in my part of the world, this could be habitat loss for 60 taxa of insects. Many of them are the mayflies, stoneflies, and caddisflies that are the best indicators of high quality water And so we're losing habitat for those organisms. Less organisms drifting downstream, and those organisms that drift downstream are what are providing food for fishes that are living downstream, the drift-feeding fishes. And not surprising, I guess, but there aren't very many stream ecologists who study culverts. I want to change that. I think that this is an important thing to study, but I have had a hard time convincing people of that. I found one study that was done, and they found higher fecal coliform below these, below culverts. And I think one of the reasons for that is that rats and raccoons and so on use these areas, and they defecate there then, and so then you get this mat of bacteria in the pipes, and then when there's high flow, it gets swept downstream. So this is obviously impacting downstream systems. And the other thing that happens when one converts a drainage network from a natural stream system into a series of pipes is that the capacity of that system to purify itself is really decreased. So these are some studies that we did looking at the ability of streams in a forested watershed versus metropolitan Atlanta watershed to remove the nutrients from water. So how effective are they at cleaning up the nitrogen and the phosphorus that we're adding to the system? And you can see that they're more effective in removing this from the forested system than they are in the metropolitan streams. And this is because we have altered those systems. We've changed the hydrology of them, we've changed their channel shape, we've changed the kinds of organisms that lives in them, and we've converted many of them to pipes. And we often hear about problems with urban systems and that they have elevated concentrations of nutrients and contaminants, and we think of this as a result of adding to fertilizers and so on, and adding things to it, and wastewater and so on, and that's certainly true. But I think we also have to recognize that a stream is natural, has an ability to purify itself, but because we have so altered it, we've really reduced its capacity for nutrient uptake, for nutrient removal, for self-cleansing. And it's not just urbanization that does these things. This is an example of mountaintop removal, valley fill coal mining. This used to be there, and the top of that mountain was taken off and dumped in the valley, eliminating the stream, and not only right at its immediate site. This is what a stream looks like in the southern Appalachians, and this is what it looks like below one of the valley fills, just choked with sediment coming from those valley fills. And mountaintop removal, valley fill coal mining is extensive throughout the Appalachians. It's been estimated that over 1,400 kilometers of stream have been lost in central Appalachia, and that's a vast underestimate because it's done from 1 to 24,000 maps. And now you know that that means that there's an awful lot of other stream channels that have been filled in that we don't know about. And agriculture also has an impact on streams. This is in the Midwest, a field that with tile drains, and beneath that field is this little pipe that drains water. So when it rains, that water goes rapidly into the pipe. Goes quickly into the stream. Very little capacity for nutrient removal. Agriculture also has an impact in more arid areas by groundwater pumping and just simply withdrawal of water from the stream so that the channel becomes dry. So, small streams are uncatalogued, unnamed, unappreciated, unprotected, and suffering from what Bill Odom called the tyranny of small decisions, meaning each person thinks, it's just a little stream, it's so dinky, how could it possibly matter? And yet what we've done cumulatively is impacted these systems greatly. And when we do that, we lose ecosystem services. The Millennium Ecosystem Assessment has recently come out and talked about the services that natural ecosystems provide, and they divided those services into provisioning, regulating, and cultural, and headwater streams provide services in all of those areas. They supply food resources for downstream ecosystems. We fish the fish that live at those. They're effective in recharging groundwater, in regulating floods, in purifying water. They provide aesthetic and educational and definitely recreational activities. So by eliminating these systems from the landscape, we are losing the services that they provide. And we have I've tried to emphasize that we've done this cumulatively, that it's a series of small decisions. And I think that there's some hope for restoration and improvement by small decisions and small actions in the opposite direction. So I want to say a little bit about restoration. I've been involved with a group of people that's been looking at restoration projects nationally, and you can see that the interest in restoration and the amount of restoration projects that are going on has increased greatly. We're spending on the order, in the United States are spending on the order of $1 billion a year on stream restoration projects. And nationally, this is what it looks like. Individual projects are not that huge. There's about half a kilometer in length, but only about 10% of them are monitored. And we're concerned about that because we don't know how to do, we know how to do some kinds of restoration, but we have much to learn about other kinds of restoration. And I was really pleased to see in the pamphlet I read on the River Center here that that's one of the goals of that center, is to better understand how to do restoration in streams, how to improve stream conditions. What's the case in the Pacific Northwest? We sort of divided up into groups and looking at different parts of the country, and for these 4 states, 23,000 projects. We did 4 states in the Southeast, and you know how many projects we had? 800. So a lot more projects happening here, and an average cost is $77,000, but a very low fraction of those are monitored. And if you don't monitor, you're not going to learn. So this is what it looks like. Why are we doing this? Water quality management, riparian management, habitat improvement, fish passage, and so on. Those are the top 4 in terms of numbers of projects. So the bars are number of projects, and the line is the amount of dollars spent. What does it look like in the Pacific Northwest? Your number 1 for number of projects is riparian management. Number 2 is bank stabilization. If you look at the amount of dollars that is spent, though, number 1 is for water quality management, number 2 for habitat improvement in stream, and then the third, and I think a very significant and important way to go about improving streams, is in land acquisition. And then I want to talk just of one example of a kind of restoration project. And this is a project that was done in DeKalb County, which is one of the Atlanta counties. And this is actually a county employee who had about $20,000 and wanted to do something to this stream right here. Before it was sort of this, it was just a field that wasn't being used, and so they daylighted it. She opened it up, and this is what it looks like 10 years later. And as a consequence of that, this unfortunately was not monitored, but other sites like this that have been monitored have shown increased taxa richness and decreased fecal coliform when we've taken the stream out of the pipe and put it in, let it flow naturally. And so this is a real movement in the U.S. And actually globally called daylighting. And this is a publication put out by Rocky Mountain Institute. It's on the web and gives examples of streams that have been daylighted all over the world. Here are 2, one from Kansas and one from Zurich. So the stream used to be under here, and this is what that stream looks like now. Still not perfect, but but nonetheless, it's allowed to see the light of day. And here's the stream was under here in Zurich, in Switzerland, and this is what it looks like now. So these kinds of daylighting projects are going on, and I think that we can begin to make a difference a little bit at a time. We have caused some of the problems, or many of the problems, a little bit at a time. I think cumulative positive impact is also possible. So I want to end with my plea, which is I think that science is more than discovering new knowledge. It's putting that knowledge into action. For me, that has meant learning something about headwater streams, recognizing what's happening them today, and then trying to do something to make a difference, to change that, to bring them back to their original condition. And so why is it important to do this? It's needed. Here's an example. Here's something, again, from the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment. This is in different scenarios for the year 2050. The amount of water we're going to be needing to withdraw. This is the current water withdrawal. So regardless of what scenario they envision, we're going to be withdrawing more water, which means we're going to be having an impact on those stream systems. So our knowledge, our scientific knowledge, is critical to help manage this problem better. There's selfish reasons to do it as well. I think it leads to new scientific insights, a test bed for testing our hypotheses on what makes a stream work. If we can't bring it back to its former life, maybe we don't understand how the system works. And then we hear a great deal about academic freedom and about the ability to do research on the subjects that we want. I think academic freedom also carries with it a responsibility to speak out when you have the relevant expertise, and particularly if others are not being allowed to speak out. If for some reason they are not being able to voice their concern for loss of a particular kind of habitat or loss of a species, I think those of us in academia who have that freedom have a responsibility to tell it as we see it. And then finally, I think that we can make a difference. I think that legislators are interested in this, or some of them are anyway, of what is our understanding of why are streams important. So a group of scientists and I got together and wrote this document about the scientific imperative for defending small streams and wetlands. And we did this because there's a big question about the jurisdiction of the Clean Water Act. How far upstream does the Clean Water Act extend? Can we use the Clean Water Act to protect those headwater streams? There's a recent Supreme Court decision that calls some of this into question, and I think that our input is desperately needed now to help the legal community think about the contributions that are made by headwater streams and how we establish those linkages between headwaters and downstream navigable waters. So our input is definitely needed. And the consequence of doing this, I think, and what I'm trying to achieve, is to change our perspectives on the birthplaces of rivers. Right now, those little headwater streams are called drains. That's what they call them in Michigan, drains. Ditches, gutters, pipes. Recognize that they're stream ecosystems. And we've been telling the engineers who design our cities and build our roads that what we want is to move water efficiently off the landscape. And instead, we would have a very different landscape if we recognize that these are stream ecosystems, that they provide ecosystem services that are of value to our society. That's my goal. Thank you.
Well, we'd like to ask you to come to the microphones to ask Judy questions, and if some of you have a question, make your way towards the microphone. as you're doing that, I have a question
All right.
for you, Judy. You talked about mountaintop mining that's devastating to small streams, and you talked about it in the Virginias, and yet we're facing that right here in the North Fork of the Flathead River. We have very viable and ongoing, very rapid proposals for mountaintop mining of coal in British Columbia, and those are the headwaters of the very river that flows down to Flathead Lake, and it's in the viewshed, airshed, and watershed of an international biosphere reserve. What do we do? I mean, we need to get your message out wider.
We do, and it's not just, I mean, there you're dealing with not only interstate, but international issues. And I guess you told me briefly that that was happening once. I didn't realize that it was quite so imminent. But it's huge in the Appalachians. And Bruce Wallace, one of my colleagues, is there's currently a case in one of the U.S. courts about whether permits should be let to do this kind of mining. But I don't know how one impacts the Canadian system.
Is progress being made in West Virginia and other
We
places?
will find out. The decision is due like in a week or two. And so, I mean, there are some really good people that are fighting this. That's the one thing that I see as positive. And I think that we're bringing more information to bear and showing how these systems really do matter. And so therefore, you know, I guess I'm an optimist.
Any other questions out there?
Yeah.
Here's one.
Good.
Judy, Vicky.
Hi, Judy. You've certainly brought a very timely message to Missoula. I'm sure you've heard Missoula called the hub of 5 valleys, and actually we are the hub of a lot more valleys than that. In addition to our 3 big rivers, we have a real wealth of creeks: Rattlesnake Creek, Patty Creek, Grant Creek, O'Brien Creek, Miller Creek, Laval, Butler. I could go on and on. Creeks coming down to Missoula. And of course, they're some of the main amenities of this town. They're one of the things that attracts people here. And unfortunately, everybody wants to build their house right by the creek so they can spit into it. And so, first, the houses are there, and then the pavement and the flooding, and then they demand a levee to protect them from the flood, and then ultimately the creek gets put into a storm sewer. So just in the last year or so, the city insisted on putting a big stretch of Patty Creek into a storm sewer. So here we are in Lighton, Missoula, doing reverse daylighting. We're putting our creeks into storm sewers. And the same thing is in the future of all those other creeks I listed, as the city marches out, rapidly growing and not providing very much protection for those creeks. We did just pass a big open space bond that's intended to be used for conservation easements and to provide some protection to creeks. Our governor has appointed a task force, probably Jack's on it for all I know, to look at methods of protecting creeks with setbacks and things of that sort. So some things are happening, but unfortunately growth is happening a lot faster. And another thing that I'm sure you're concerned about is global warming dries up those little creeks.
Yeah.
And so people don't even think of them really as being a creek. They're not really there. So, you know, what about that concern about global warming? How do we convince people to protect creeks when it seems less and less obvious to them that they're even there?
That was a huge issue. Well, okay, so that's why I think some of the stuff that I talked about with the importance of intermittent streams, because what you're doing is you're changing a perennial stream, a stream that flows all year long, into one that's intermittent. And there was just an example in Virginia where they had the same problem, and a developer went out there in the driest month of the year and said, "There's no water in this channel. There's no reason why I can't fill it in," you know. And unfortunately, we fought it very hard, but the county commissioner or the county commission let them do it. But it's sort of recognizing that those channels that are not wet all year round make a significant contribution, particularly in this part of the world, to the network as a whole. And I think that we stream ecologists could have done a better job at at really doing good studies that show, with this kind of intermittency in the basin, what's the impact downstream systems. So I think that there's really good science to be done that will improve that. Yeah.
There was good science on Penny Creek. There's pure cut slope, west cut slope trout in there. A lot of value associated with that creek. It's sort of like it's a human safety issue. Forget it. It trumps everything else the creek's going.
Well, okay, so are you familiar with the Millennium Assessment? I think one of the things that they've done there is try to link this issue, this ecosystem services, with the economic benefits that those services provide. And I think showing some of those services that we take for granted, like flood control, like providing trout and so on, and increasing the property value of homes when you have trout in the stream. Those are the kinds of things I think that help in those arguments. I've lost a lot of them too.
Bill Woosner.
Oh, Bill, hi.
In your presentation, I heard you say on the restoration side of things that part of what the goals were to take these headwater streams and try to put them back the way they were or something close to it. So could you comment on this idea of our ability to do this, and also the assessment issues when you start a project and you try to work on it? You noted even on some what looked like good examples, look good on paper or in pictures, that they were successful, but you said they weren't monitored, there were no goals set, or no way to assess that. So can we really put things back the way they were in these systems? And if not, or if so, how do we set criteria as we start a project, and then how do we judge whether or not we accomplish those goals?
Well, really good questions, and I think that it's critical to recognize that oftentimes the stream restoration is done based on historical photographs or something like that, and they try to put the stream back the way it was 100 years ago without recognizing that the watershed has changed, and sediment delivery has changed, and the way water is delivered to the stream has changed. So clearly any design of a new stream channel needs to take into account what's been happening in the watershed, so that the channel is designed to be able to deal with the current flow conditions. And in terms of assessment, I think that one of the really important components of that is to be clear about what are the goals that one is trying to establish. Are you trying to improve water quality? Well, then your assessment criteria need to have something to do with water quality. You're trying to improve fish habitat. Well, then you need to have assessment criteria that are actually looking at the long-term benefits. And that's the other problem that we found, even in those 10% of sites of projects that were monitored. They were maybe monitored for 2 years or 3 years at most, and that's just not long enough. The Army Corps of Engineers and US EPA proposed some mitigation guidelines recently that again would have some of those sites monitored for only a couple of years, and that's just not long enough. We need to get into the public awareness that it's going to take some years for these systems to recover, and we need to see how they respond when there's the big 10-inch rainstorm that only happens once every decade. So those are real issues that all stream restoration projects are dealing with today. Yeah, Rick.
Hi, Judy. Thanks a lot. That was a wonderful overview. And you had mentioned very briefly, you're talking about the Clean Water Act. Could you elaborate for people a little bit more about that? And then also, sort of, what would you recommend? Not only, first of all, what are you personally doing? And what would you recommend other professionals, particularly young professionals that are just coming into the field of limnology and stream ecology, to do in terms of interacting with the legal system, and maybe even give some insight into driving this all the way to the Supreme Court, where a lot of these kinds of things are actually settled?
Okay, so a number of years ago, rules were proposed that would have basically eliminated Clean Water Act coverage from small streams. Those rules we managed to stop those. But a recent Supreme Court decision, Rapanos-Carabel, was decided, and the question was, it was really a wetlands question, and do these wetlands that do not have a surface water connection to, or surface connection to streams, are they still protected under the Clean Water Act? And the decision was basically 4 judges said no, they are not under the Clean Water Act. 4 judges said yes, they are. And so the Judge Kennedy is the judge whose decision is the one that is going to be the law of the land for now. And he basically remanded the case back to lower court. The critical issue, and so although it was dealt with wetlands, it really deals with headwater streams as well. It says how far upstream does the protection of the Clean Water Act extend? And the concern is, you know, if it says, if it's only the 4 judges who voted said that it shouldn't extend upstream, wanted it to only extend to navigable waters, traditionally navigable waters. Well, much of the wastewater treatment plants in this country discharge their waste into small streams, maybe larger than some of the ones I've been talking about tonight, but nonetheless smaller streams. And so by eliminating Clean Water Act protection, you'd be losing the protection of the permitting system and so on. It'd be dreadful. So the big legal issue with Kennedy's decision what is the significant nexus between the headwaters or the wetland of concern and downstream waters. So I think that our job as scientists is to help the legal profession sort out and to provide them the data that can be used to help establish that significant nexus. And for me, that is looking at this issue of nutrient removal and how much of the nutrients get removed in the headwaters and what impact that then has on downstream systems. And okay, that was a very long question, Rick. I could do a whole talk on that. Young people, yeah, right. So, okay, so one of my rosy outlook on the world, well, I think one of the great things that's happening, and this happened in the last decade, is all the watershed groups, the local watershed groups. And I know that in our town there's something called UOWN, Upper Oconee Watershed Network. I love it. And a lot of our students are very active in that, and they're doing sampling, and believe me, when something comes up like this, what you were just talking about in this creek where they wanted to put it in a pipe, the UOWN people come out and they have data, and they have argued effectively. They wanted to put a stream in a culvert. They wanted to do a culvert under a road, and this group of people convinced them to build a bridge instead, which provides much better fish passages and so on. So I think that a great way to begin, and I think that you can have a huge impact locally, and younger in your career. I think that's a really effective way to begin, and then connection with national groups as well. Do I see another question out there? Yeah.
A lot of your work in the past couple of years, and some of your talk today, is focused on urbanized streams and returning those urbanized streams to a former state. How do you pick reference streams for urban areas? I mean, it seems like it's very difficult to input large wood or anything when you're surrounded by houses and such.
Picking reference streams in an urban area is really critical. One of my recent students looked at some stream restoration projects, which were basically riparian planting projects in the Atlanta area, and her reference site was actually a stream that looked fairly nice, flowing through a nature park, and it actually had a lot of woody debris and so on. But the sad part of it is that the riparian planting and so on really were just Band-Aids, and because the big problem in this river basin was basic water quality and uncontrolled stormwater. And so even though the riparian zone was in much better shape, and we did see somewhat higher insect numbers, even the stream flowing through the nature preserve was not as good as a stream flowing through a forested area. So, you know, we're not going to see restoration. It's really a wrong term, but we're going to see improvement. And but you point out a real problem, which is finding reference areas. Yeah.
Well, all right then.
Good.
Judy, thank you very much. Thank you all for coming tonight.